तस्मात् श्रील भक्तिवेदांत नारायण गोस्वामी महाराज श्री गुरुदेव की जय। नितिल प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरश तस्मात् श्रील भक्तिवेदांत वामन गोस्वामी महाराज की जय। नितिल प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरश तस्मात् श्रील भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरश तस्मात् भक्ति प्रज्ञान केशव गोस्वामी महाराज की जय। नितिल प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरश तस्मात् श्रील भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट महाभागवत श्रील गोक्षरस बाबाजी महाराज की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट श्रील सच्चिदानंद श्रील भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्रील जगन्नाथ दास महाराज की जय। श्री रूप गौरीय गुरु वर्ग की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्टदास रघुनाथ शारद गोसाई प्रभु की जय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंदारी श्री गौर प्रसाद वृंद की जय। नाम श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुर वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट प्रदात गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड की जय। श्री मुन देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योग माया की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरि नाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर वृंद की जय। Srila Prabhupada's coming to the west. Arrival in the rest ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Gaur. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Vedanta Narayanati Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Namo mahavadanyaya Krishna prema pradayate Krishnaya Krishna chaitanya namne gauratishe namaha. Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yam Pravrajantam Anupetam Apeta Krityam Dvaipayano Virahakatara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmayataya Taravo Bhinedustang Sarva Bhuta Hridayam Munimanatosmi. Narayanam namaskrityam narang chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudirayet. Shrinvatang swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana ridantasto yabhadrani vidhunoti suritsatam. Nashta prayeshvabhadreshu nityang bhagavata sevaya Bhagavatyuttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. Tavaivasmi na jivami tvaya vina. Iti vigyaya radhe tvam nayamam charanantikam. Bhaktya vihina aparada lakshay. Kshiptashtakama ditaranka madhe. Kripa maitam sharanam prapanna vrinde namaste charanarvindam. Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All right, so we are now beginning chapter 16. It's a pretty long chapter, so it'll take us a few days to get through. But first, let's do a recap. What we read before. Let's see. Dandavat Pranams Ganga Didi, and Rup Manjari Didi, Prajumna Prabhu, Mantramurti Mataji. Dandavat Pranams. And everybody else who's watching. There's 7 people watching right now. Haribol. Okay. Let me make this. All right, so let's go over the 15th chapter, what we read yesterday. When Citraketu lay like a dead body next to the dead body of his son, Narad and Angira instructed him about spiritual consciousness as follows. What relationship does the dead body for which you lament have with you? And what relationship do you have with him? Did this relationship exist before? Does it truly exist now? Will it continue to exist in the future? Union and separation of the jivas by the force of time. As small particles of sand come together and are separated by the force of the waves, the living entities sometimes come together and are sometimes separated by the force of time. Artificial relationship of parenthood depends on the Lord's Maya. Just as grains appear or do not appear from the seeds, children appear or do not appear from fathers impelled by the Lord's Maya. I don't actually get this. Anyways. Okay. All material relationships are temporary. Both you and we, as well as everything moving and non-moving existing at this time, were not together before birth and will not be together after death. Even now we are not together. Note, that which does not exist in all 3 phases of time cannot be called substantial. A dream does not exist before one falls asleep, nor does it continue after one wakes up. The period for dreaming exists only between these 2 states, and therefore it is false in the sense that it is impermanent. Similarly, the relationships in this world are temporary, though not false. The Lord, though not interested, still, like a child playing, creates, maintains, and destroys all beings by other beings, such as fathers create, kings maintain, and snakes destroy. So, the Lord, like a child playing, creates, maintains, and destroys all beings by other beings who are created by him and are dependent on him. Link. Citraketu may say, I, as a father, produced a son, but he is dead now, and that's why I'm lamenting. Because he is dead now, I'm lamenting. Parents produce the body, not the soul. As from one seed, another seed is generated, so from one body, the father, through another body, the mother, a third body, the child, is generated. But the living entity, the soul, is eternal, just as the material elements are eternal. Note, the sages asked Citraketu, since the body of the sun which you produced is present before you, why do you lament? Yeah, the body's right here. This is what you produced. Then Citraketu said, but I'm lamenting because the jiva is no longer present. And then the sages, the jiva is eternal. It is not produced by you. The jiva doesn't have any connection with you. It's not your thing. Designations are imaginary. Divisions of generalization and specification, such as nationality and individuality, are imagined by persons due to ignorance. Citraketu became enlightened by those instructions, and became hopeful with knowledge. Wiping his shriveled face with his hands, he began to speak. Who are you, who are fully developed in knowledge, the greatest of all great, disguised as liberated wandering mendicants? Brahmins who are Vaishnavas, the dearest servants of Krishna, wander on the surface of the earth at their own will, dressed like madmen, just to enlighten people like us, absorbed in material consciousness. Examples of such perfect persons: Sanat Kumar, Narad, Ribhu, Angira, Devala, Asita, Vyasadev, Markandeya, Gautama, Vashishta, Parashuram, Kapila, Shukadev, Durvasa, Yagyavalka, Jatu Karna, Aruni, Romasha, Chyavan, Dattatreya, Asuri, Patanjali, Dhaumya, Panchashika, Hiranyanabha, Kaushalya, Shrutadev, and Ritadwaja. You must certainly be among them. Yeah, well, there's Narad, and there's Angira. Yeah, he was the first of the four. First two of the four. Please ignite the torch of knowledge in me, who is like a village animal, with the intelligence of a fool, who is merged in the darkness of ignorance. Then Narad and Angira enlighten Citraketu. I am the same Angira Rishi who gave you this son, and he is the great sage Narad, the direct son of Lord Brahma. We have come to relieve you from this false lamentation for your son, which is due to your being merged in the darkness of ignorance. Advanced devotees who serve the Brahmins should not lament for material loss and gain. I did not give you transcendental knowledge when I came the first time, as your mind was absorbed in material things. Instead, I gave you only a son. Now you are actually experiencing the misery of a parent. One's wife, house, kingdom, opulences, sense objects, and others are all temporary and are the causes of lamentation, shoka, illusion, fear, and distress. They are like a Gandharva Nagar, and they are no better than dreams, illusions, and mental concoctions. Visible objects that we see are like dreams and mental concoctions with no permanent existence. Only due to our past actions do we create such mental concoctions that in turn make us perform further activities. From past actions comes mental concoctions, vision of objects, which causes further actions. The body is the source of all miseries. This body of the living entity is composed of material elements, knowledge, senses, and action senses. It is said that it gives the living entity various types of suffering and threefold miseries. Considering with a steady mind the real position about the soul, give up the faith that the material objects in this world of duality are permanent. Take to detachment and attain peace. Then Narad initiates Citraketu. Attentively receive from me a mantra which is most auspicious. After accepting it from me, in 7 nights you will be able to see the Lord Sankarshan face to face. In former days, Lord Shiva and other demigods, taking shelter of the lotus feet of Sankarshan, were freed from illusion and achieved unequaled, unsurpassed glories. You will very soon attain that very same position. Then Citraketu meets the Supreme Lord. So we're going to read about the jīva speaks to Citraketu, and then the child's funeral rites and the queen's atonement. As related in this chapter, Citraketu was able to talk with his dead son and hear from him the truth of life. When Citraketu was appeased, the great sage Narad gave him a mantra, and by chanting this mantra, Citraketu found shelter at the lotus feet of Sankarshan. The living entity is eternal. Thus he has neither birth nor death. Nahanyate hanyamane sharire. According to the reactions of one's fruitive activities, one takes birth in various species of life among the birds, beasts, trees, human beings, demigods, and so on, thus rotating through various bodies. For a certain period of time, one receives a particular type of body as a son or a father in a false relationship. All our relationships in this material world with friends, relatives, or enemies consist of duality in which one feels happy and distressed on the basis of illusion. The living entity is actually a spirit soul who is part and parcel of God and has nothing to do with relationships in the world of duality. Therefore, Narad Muni advised Citraketu not to lament for his so-called dead son. After hearing instructions from their dead child, Citraketu and his wife could understand that all relationships in this material world are causes of misery. The queens who had administered poison to the son of Kritaduti were very much ashamed. They atoned for the sinful act of killing a child and gave up their aspiration to have sons. Thereafter, Narad Muni chanted prayers to Narayan, who exists as Chaturvyuha, and instructed Citraketu about the Supreme Lord who creates, maintains, and annihilates everything, and who is the master of the material nature. After instructing King Citraketu in this way, he returns to Brahmaloka. These instructions about the absolute truth are called the Mahavidya. After being initiated by Narad Muni, King Citraketu chanted the Mahavidya, and after 1 week, he attained the presence of Lord Sankarshan, who was surrounded by the 4 Kumaras. The Lord was nicely dressed in bluish garments, with a helmet and ornaments of gold. His face appeared very happy. In the presence of Lord Sankarshan, Citraketu offered his obeisances and began to offer prayers. In his prayers, Citraketu said that millions of universes rest in the pores of Sankarshan, who is limitless, having no beginning and no end. The Lord is well known to the devotees for his eternity. The difference between worshipping the Lord and worshipping the demigods is that the worshipper of the Lord also becomes eternal, whereas whatever benedictions one can get from the demigods are impermanent. Unless one becomes a devotee, one cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After Citraketu finished his prayers, the unlimited Supreme Lord explained knowledge of himself to Citraketu. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ruvacha Atha deva rishi rajan samparetam nripatmajan darshayitveti hovacha gyati-nam anushochatam. Shri Shukadev Goswami said, "My dear King Parikshit, by his mystic power, the great sage Narad brought the dead son into the vision of all the lamenting relatives, and then spoke as follows. Shri Narad Uvacha Jivatman Pasya Bhadram Te Mataram Pitaram Chate Suhrido Bandhavastapta Shuchatvat Kritaya Bhrisham. Shri Narad Muni said, O living entity, all good fortune unto you. Just see your father and mother. All your friends and relatives are overwhelmed with grief because of your passing away. Kalevaram samavishya sheshamayu suhridvrita bhungshva bhogan pitri pratan adhitishta nripasanam. Because you died untimely, the balance of your lifetime still remains. Therefore, you may re-enter your body and enjoy the remainder of your life, surrounded by your friends and relatives. Accept the royal throne and all the opulences given by your father. Jīva uvacha kasmin janmanyami mahyam pitaro mataro bhavan karmabhir brahmya manasya devatir yandriyonishu. By the mystic power of Narad Muni, the living entity re-entered his dead body. And for a short time, he re-entered his body for a short time and spoke in reply to Narad Muni's request. He said, "According to the results of my fruitive activities, I, the living being, transmigrate from one body to another, sometimes going to the species of the demigods, and sometimes to the species of lower animals, sometimes among the vegetables, and sometimes to the human species. Therefore, in which birth were these my mother and father? No one is actually my mother and father. How can I accept these two people as my parents?" Purport. Here it is made clear that the living being enters a material body that is like a machine created by the 5 gross elements of material nature: earth, water, fire, air, and sky, and the 3 subtle elements: mind, intelligence, and ego. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, there are 2 separate identities, called inferior and superior natures, which both belong to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. According to the results of a living entity's fruitive actions, he is forced to enter the material elements in different types of bodies. This time, the living entity was supposed to have been the son of Maharaj Citraketu and Queen Kritaduti, because according to the laws of nature, he had entered a body made by the king and queen. Actually, however, he was not their son. The living entity is the son of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and because he wants to enjoy this material world, the Supreme Lord gives him a chance to enter various bodies. The living entity has no true relationship with the material body, he gets from his material father and mother. He is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but he is allowed to go through different bodies. The body created by the so-called father and mother actually has nothing to do with its so-called creators. Therefore, the living entity flatly denied that Maharaj Citraketu and his wife were his father and mother. Bandhu gyatari madhyasta mitra dasina vidvisha sarva eva hi sarvesham bhavanti kramashomita. Sorry. In this material world, which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally, they mediate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. Purport. It is our practical experience in this material world that the same person who is one's friend today becomes one's enemy tomorrow. Our relationships as friends or enemies, family men or outsiders, are actually the results of our different dealings. Citraketu Maharaj was lamenting for his son, who is now dead, but he could have considered the situation otherwise. This living entity, he could have thought, was my enemy in my past life, and now, having appeared as my son, he is prematurely leaving just to give me pain and agony. Why should he not consider his dead son his former enemy, and instead of lamenting, be jubilant because of an enemy's death? As in Bhagavad Gita 3:27, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha. Factually, everything is happening because of our association with the modes of material nature. Therefore, one who is my friend today in association with the modes of goodness may be my enemy tomorrow in association with the modes of passion and ignorance. As the modes of material nature work, in illusion we accept others as friends, enemies, sons, or fathers in terms of the reactions of different dealings under different conditions. Yata vastuni panyani hemadhini tatastata paryatanti nareshvenam jiva yonishu kartrishu. Just as gold and other commodities are continually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe, being injected into various bodies and different species of life by one kind of father and another. Purport. It has already been explained that Citraketu's son was his enemy in a past life and had now appeared as a son just to give him more severe pain. Indeed, the untimely death of the son caused severe lamentation for the father. One may put forward the argument: if the king's son was his enemy, how could the king have so much affection for him? In answer, the example is given that when someone's wealth falls into the bands of his enemy, the money becomes the enemy's friend. Then the enemy can use it for his own purposes. Indeed, he can even use it to harm its previous owner. Therefore, the money belongs neither to the one party nor to the other. The money is always money, but in different situations, it can be used as an enemy or a friend. As explained in Bhagavad Gita, it is not by any father or mother that the living entity is given his birth. The living entity is a completely separate identity from the so-called father and mother. By the laws of nature, the living entity is forced to enter the semen of a father and be injected into the womb of a mother. He is not in control of selecting what kind of father he will accept. Prakrite kriyamanani. The laws of nature force him to go to different fathers and mothers, just like a consumer commodity that is purchased and sold. Therefore, the so-called relationship of father and son is an arrangement of prakriti, or nature. It has no meaning, and therefore it is called illusion. The same living entity sometimes takes shelter of an animal father and mother, and sometimes a human father and mother. Sometimes he accepts a father and mother among the birds, and sometimes he accepts a demigod father and mother. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, Brahmanda Brahmite kon bhagyavan jeev, Guru Krishna prasade pai, bhakti lata beach. Harassed life after life by the laws of nature, the living entity wanders throughout the entire universe in different planets and different species of life. Somehow or other, if he is fortunate enough, he comes in touch with a devotee who reforms his entire life. Then the living entity goes back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, it is said, Janame janame sarve pita mata pai, Krishna Guru nahi mile bhaja hari e. In the transmigration of the soul through different bodies, everyone, in every form of life, be it human, animal, tree, or demigod, gets a father and mother. This is not very difficult. The difficulty is to obtain a bona fide spiritual master in Krishna. Therefore, the duty of a human being is to capture the opportunity to come in touch with Krishna's representative, the bona fide spiritual master. Under the guidance of the spiritual master, the spiritual father, one can return home back to Godhead. Nityartasya sambandho yanito drishyate nrishu yavadyasya hi sambandho mamatvam tavadevahi. A few living entities are born in the human species, and others are born as animals. Although both are living entities, their relationships are impermanent. An animal may remain in the custody of a human being for some time, and then that same animal may be transferred into the possession of other human beings. As soon as the animal goes away, the former proprietor no longer has a sense of ownership. As long as the animal is in his possession, he certainly has an affinity for it. But as soon as the animal is sold, the affinity is lost. Purport. Aside from the fact that the soul transmigrates from one body to another, even in this life, the relationship between living entities are impermanent, as exemplified in this verse. The son of Citraketu was named Harshashoka, or jubilation and lamentation. The living entity is certainly eternal, but because he is covered by a temporary dress, the body, his eternity is not observed. Dehinosme nita dehe ko maram yoganam jara. The embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age. Thus, the bodily dress is impermanent. The living entity, however, is permanent. As an animal is transferred from one owner to another, the living entity, who is the son of Citraketu, lived as a son for some time, but as soon as he was transferred to another body, the affectionate relationship was broken. As stated in the example given in the previous verse, when one has a commodity in the hands, he considers it his, but as soon as it is transferred, it becomes someone else's commodity. it becomes someone else's commodity. Then one no longer has a relationship with it. He has no affection for it, nor does he lament for it. Evam yoni gato jiva sanityo nirahankara yavadyatra palabhyeta tavat svatvam hi tasya tat. Even though one living entity becomes connected with another because of a relationship based on bodies that are perishable, the living entity is eternal. Actually, it is the body that is born or lost, not the living entity. One should not accept that the living entity takes birth or dies. The living being actually has no relationship with so-called fathers and mothers. As long as he appears as a son of a certain father and mother as a result of his past fruitive activities, he has a connection with the body given by that father and mother. Thus, he falsely accepts himself as their son and acts affectionately. After he dies, however, that relationship is finished. Under these circumstances, one should not be falsely involved with jubilation and lamentation. Purport. When the living entity lives within the material body, he falsely thinks that he is the body, although actually he is not. His relationship with his body and his so-called father and mother are false, illusory conceptions. These illusions continue as long as one is not enlightened about the situation of the living entity. Esha nitya vyaya shukshma, esha sarvashaya swadrik, atma maya gunar vishvam, atmanam srijate prabhu. The living entity is eternal and imperishable because he actually has no beginning and no end. He never takes birth or dies. He is the basic principle of all types of bodies, yet he does not belong to the bodily category. The living being is so sublime that he is equal in quality to the Supreme Lord. Nonetheless, because he is extremely small, he is prone to be illusioned by the external energy, and thus he creates various bodies for himself according to his different desires. Purport. In this verse, the philosophy of Chinta Bheda Ved, simultaneous oneness and difference, is described. The living entity is eternal, nitya, like the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the difference is that the Supreme Lord is the greatest, and no one being, but the difference is that the Supreme Lord is the greatest, no one being equal to or greater than him. Whereas the living entity is sukshma, or extremely small. The Shastra describes that the magnitude of the living entity is 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair. The Supreme Lord is all-pervading, andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam. Relatively, if the living being is accepted as the smallest, there should naturally be inquiry about the greatest. The greatest is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the smallest is the living entity. Another peculiar characteristic of the jiva is that he becomes covered by maya, atma maya gunai. He is prone to being covered by the Supreme Lord's illusory energy. The living entity is responsible for his conditional life in the material world, and therefore he is described as Prabhu, the Master. If he likes, he can come to this material world, and if he likes, he can return home back to Godhead. Because he wanted to enjoy this material world, the Supreme Personality of Godhead gave him a material body through the agency of the material energy. As the Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita 18:61, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hrideshar juna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantrarudhani mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The Supreme Lord gives the living entity a chance to enjoy in this material world as he desires, but he openly expresses his own desire that the living entity give up all material aspirations, fully surrender unto him, and return home back to Godhead. The living entity is the smallest, shukshma. Jiva Goswami says in this connection that the living entity within the body is extremely difficult for materialistic scientists to find, although we understand from authorities that the living entity is within the body. The body is different from the living entity. Na hyasyasti priya kashin, na priya sva paropiva, ekasarva diyam drashta, kartrinam gunadoshayo. I'm just checking to see. We're reading up to verse 17. Okay. For this living entity, no one is dear, nor is anyone unfavorable. He makes no distinction between that which is his own and that which belongs to anyone else. He is one without a second. In other words, he is not affected by friends and enemies, well-wishers or mischief-mongers. He is only an observer, a witness of the different qualities of men. Purport. As explained in the previous verse, the living entity has the same qualities as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he has them in minute quantities because he is a small particle, shukshma, whereas the Supreme Lord is all-pervading and great. For the Supreme Lord, there are no friends, enemies, or relatives, for he is completely free from all the disqualifications of ignorance that characterize the conditioned souls. On the other hand, he is extremely kind and favorable to his devotees, and he is not at all satisfied with persons who are envious of his devotees. As the Lord himself confirms in Bhagavad Gita 9:29, Samoham sarvabhuteshu name dveshyotstina priya ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya maite teshu chapyaham. I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend to him. The Supreme Lord has no enemy or friends, but he is inclined toward the devotee who engages in his devotional service. Similarly, elsewhere in the Gita 16:19, the Lord says, Tanaham dvishata kruran samsareshu naradhaman kshipyama jasrama shubhan asurishvevayonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, are cast by me into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. The Lord is extremely antagonistic toward those who are envious of his devotees. To protect his devotees, the Lord sometimes has to kill their enemies. For example, to protect Prahlad Maharaj, the Lord had to kill his enemy Hiranyakashipu, although Hiranyakashipu attained salvation because of being killed by the Lord. Since the Lord is the witness of everyone's activities, he witnessed the actions of the enemies of his devotees. He witnesses the actions of the enemies of his devotees, and he's inclined to punish them. In other cases, however, he simply witnesses what the living entities do and gives the results of one's sinful or pious actions. It's the Lord's quality of Bhakta Vatsal. Na data atmahi gunam, na dosham, na kriya phalam, udasina varasina paravara. The Supreme Lord, Atma, is the creator of cause and effect. The Supreme Lord, Atma. One second. The creator of cause and effect does not accept the happiness and distress that results from fruitive actions. He is completely dependent of having to accept a material body, and because he has no material body, he is always neutral. The living entities, being part and parcel of the Lord, possess his qualities in a minute quantity. Therefore, one should not be affected by lamentation. Purport. The conditioned soul has friends and enemies. He is affected by the good qualities and the faults of his position. The Supreme Lord, however, is always transcendental. Because he is the Ishvar, the Supreme Controller, he is not affected by duality. It may therefore be said that he sits in the core of everyone's heart as the neutral witness of the cause and effects of one's activities, good and bad. We should also understand that udasina, neutral, does not mean that he takes no action. Rather, it means that he is not personally affected. For example, A court judge is neutral when two opposing parties appear before him, but he still takes action when the case warrants. To become completely neutral, indifferent to material activities, we should simply seek shelter at the lotus feet of the supreme neutral person. Maharaj Citraketu was advised that remaining neutral in such trying circumstances as the death of one's son is let me reread that. Maharaj Citraketu was advised that remaining neutral in such trying circumstances as the death of one's son is impossible. Nevertheless, since the Lord knows how to adjust everything, the best course is to depend on Him and do one's duty in devotional service to the Lord. In all circumstances, one should be undisturbed by duality. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 2:47, Karma neva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phalahetur bhur mate sangasta karmani. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. One should execute one's devotional duty, and for the results of one's actions, one should depend upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Shri-Bādarayanir uvacha Ittudirya gato jivo gyatayastasya te tada vismita mumuchu shokam chitvatma sneha shrinkalam. Sri Shukadev Goswami continued, when the conditioned soul, the jīva, in the form of Maharaj Citraketu's son, had spoken in this way and then left, Citraketu and the other relatives of the dead son were all astonished. Thus they cut off the shackles of their affection, which was due to their relationship with him, and gave up their lamentation. Nirhritya gyatayo gyater deham kritva chita kriya tatyajur dustyajam sneham shokamoka bhayartidam. After the relatives have discharged their duties by performing the proper funeral ceremonies and burning the dead child's body, they gave up the affection that leads to illusion, lamentation, fear, and pain. Such affection is undoubtedly difficult to give up, but they gave it up very easily. Balagno vriditastatra balahatya hata prabha balahatya vratam cherur brahmanar yanirupitam yamunaya maharaja smaranto dija bhashitam. Queen Kritaduti's co-wives who had poisoned the child were very much ashamed, and they lost all their bodily luster. While lamenting, O king, they remembered the instructions of Angira and gave up their ambition to bear children. Following the directions of the Brahmins, they went to the bank of the Yamuna, where they bathed and atoned for their sinful activities. Purport. In this verse, the word Bala Hatya Hata Prabha is to be particularly noted. The practice of killing children has existed in human society for a long time, since time immemorial, but in the days of yore, it was very rarely performed. At the present moment, however, in this age of Kali, abortion, killing of the child within the womb, has become very common, and sometimes a child is even killed after birth. If a woman performs such an abominable act, she gradually loses all her bodily luster, Bala Hatya Hata Prabha. It is to be noted that the ladies who had committed the sinful act of administering poison to the child were very much ashamed, and according to the directions of the Brahmins, they had to undergo atonement for killing the child. Any woman who has ever performed such an infamously sinful act must atone for it. But no one now is doing that. Under the circumstances, the women responsible must suffer in this life and in the next. Those who are sincere souls, after hearing this incident, should refrain from such child killing and should atone for their sinful activities by taking to Krishna consciousness very seriously. If one chants the Hare Krishna Mahamantra without offenses, all one's sinful actions are surely atoned for immediately. But one should not commit such deeds again, for that is an offense. Sa itang pratibodhatma Citraketur vijoktibi Grihanda kupan nishkranta Sarad pankad iva dvipaha. Thus enlightened by the instructions of the Brahmins, Angira and Narad, thus enlightened by the instructions of the Brahmins, Angira and Narad, King Citraketu became fully aware of spiritual knowledge. As an elephant becomes free from the muddy reservoir of water, King Citraketu came out of the dark well of family life. Kalindyam vidhivat snatva krita punya jalakriya monena sangyata prano brahmaputra avandata. The king bathed in the water of the Yamuna, and according to prescribed duties, he offered oblations of water to the forefathers and demigods. Very gravely, controlling his senses and minds, he then offered his respects and obeisances to the sons of Lord Brahma, Angira and Narad. Atatasmaya prapannaya bhaktaya prayatatmane Bhagavan Narada prito vidyam etam uvachaha. Thereafter, being very much pleased with Citraketu, who was a self-controlled devotee and a surrendered soul, Narad, the most powerful sage, spoke to him the following transcendental instructions. It's a line missing. What time is it? It's 7:51. You know, tomorrow is a very long day of reading. Maybe we can read a little bit of Narad's instructions. Maybe we could read to verse 20. And then that way we don't have an overwhelming amount to read tomorrow. So yeah, I'm going to read up to 20. Om namastubhyam bhagavate vasudevaya dhimahi prajumnanya niruddhaya nama sankarshanaya cha namo vijnanamatraya paramanandamurtaye atmaramaya shantaya nivritta dvaita drishtaye sai. Narad gave Citraketu the following mantra. O Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, who are addressed by the Omkar, Pranava, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. O Lord Vasudev, I meditate upon you. O Lord Pradyumna, Lord Aniruddha, and Lord Sankarshan, I offer you my respectful obeisances. O reservoir of spiritual potency, O supreme bliss, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, who are self-sufficient and most peaceful. O ultimate truth, one without a second, you are realized as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, and are therefore the reservoir of all knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that he is Pranava Samavedeshu, the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. In transcendental knowledge, the Lord is addressed as Pranava, Omkar, which is a symbolic representation of the Lord in sounds. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vasudev, who is an expansion of Narayan, expands himself as Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshan. From Sankarshan comes a second Narayan expansion, and from this Narayan comes further expansions of Vasudev, Pradyumna, Sankarshan, and Aniruddha. The Sankarshan in this group is the original cause of the three Purushas, namely Karnadakshay Vishnu, Garbhadakshay Vishnu, and Kshiradakshay Vishnu. Kshiradakshay Vishnu is situated in every universe in a special planet called Shvetadvip. This is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, Andantarasta. The word Anda means this universe. Within this universe is a planet called Shvetadvip, where Kshiradakshay Vishnu is situated. From him come all the incarnations within this universe. As confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, all these forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are Advaita, they are not different. They are non-different. And they are also achyuta, infallible. They do not fall down like the conditioned souls. The ordinary living entity is prone to falling into the clutches of Maya, but the Supreme Lord in its different incarnations and forms, but the Supreme Lord in its different incarnations and forms is achyuta, infallible. Therefore, his body is different from the material body possessed by the conditioned soul. The word matra is explained in the Medini dictionary as follows: Matra karna vibhushayam vitte mane parichade. The word matra and its different imports is used to indicate the decoration of the ear, possession, respect, and the possession of a covering, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 2.14. Matra sparshas tukonteya satoshna sukadukada agama payano nityas tang tatikshasva bharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. In the conditioned state of life, the body is used as our dress, and as one needs different dresses during the summer and winter, we conditioned souls are changing bodies according to our desires. However, because the body of the Supreme Lord is full of knowledge, it needs no covering. The idea that Krishna's body is like ours, in other words, that his body and soul are different, is a misunderstanding. There are no such differences for Krishna because his body is in full knowledge. Here we receive material bodies because of a lack of knowledge, but because Krishna, Vasudeva, is in full knowledge, there is no difference between his body and his soul. Krishna remembers what he said 40 million years ago to the sun god, but an ordinary being cannot remember what he said just the day before yesterday. This is the difference between Krishna's body and our body. Therefore, the Lord is addressed as Vijnana Matraya Paramananda Murtaye. Because the Lord's body is full of knowledge, he always enjoys transcendental bliss. Indeed, his very form is Paramananda. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra, Ananda Mayo Bhyasat. By nature, the Lord is Anandamoy. Whenever we see Krishna, he is always full of Ananda in all circumstances. No one can make him morose. Atma Ramaya. He does not need to search for external enjoyment because he is self-sufficient. Shantaya. He has no anxiety. One who has to seek pleasure from other sources is always full of anxiety. Karmis, Gyanis, and Yogis are full of anxiety because they want something. But a devotee does not want anything. He is simply satisfied in the service of the Lord, who is fully blissful. Nivritta Dvaita Drishtaye. In our conditioned life, our bodies have different parts. But although Krishna apparently has different bodily parts, no part of his body is different from any other part. Krishna can see with his eyes, and Krishna can see without his eyes. Therefore, in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, it is said, Pashyata Chakshu. He can see with his hands and legs. He does not need a particular body part to perform a particular action. Angani yasta sakalendriya vritti manti. He can do anything he desires with any part of his body, and therefore he is called Almighty. He can eat with his hands. He can see with his feet. Okay, so I'm just going to read this verse 20 and then we'll stop. Atmananu buddhayaiva, Atmanandanu, actually maybe, no, I'll read it. Atmanandanu buddhayaiva nyasta shakturmaye nama Rishikeshaya mahate namaste nantamurtaye. Perceiving your personal bliss, you are always transcendental to the waves of material nature. Therefore, my Lord, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. You are the supreme controller of the senses, and your expansions of form are unlimited. You are the greatest, and therefore I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport. This verse analytically differentiates the living entity from the Supreme Lord. The form of the Lord and the form of the conditioned soul are different because the Lord is always blissful, whereas the conditioned soul is always under the threefold miseries of the material world. The Supreme Lord is Satchidananda Vigraha. He derives Ananda, bliss, from his own self. The Lord's body is transcendental, spiritual, but because the conditioned soul has a material body, he has many bodily and mental troubles. The conditioned soul is always perturbed by attachment and detachment, whereas the Supreme Lord is always free from such dualities. The Lord is the supreme master of all the senses, whereas the conditioned soul is controlled by the senses. The Lord is the greatest, whereas the living entity is the smallest. The living entity is conditioned by the waves of material nature, but the Supreme Lord is transcendental to all actions and reactions. The expansions of the Supreme Lord's body are innumerable. Advaitam Achutam Anadim Anantarupam. That's Brahma Samhita verse 33. But the conditioned soul is limited to only one form. From history, we learn that a conditioned soul, by mystic power, can sometimes expand into 8 forms, but the Lord's bodily expansions are unlimited. This means that the bodies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead have no beginning and no end, unlike the bodies of the living entities. All right, so we'll continue Narad's instructions tomorrow. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai, Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishta Maha-Bhagavat Srila Gorksharas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishta Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai, Srila Baldev Vijabhushan Prabhu Ki Jai, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Ki Jai, Shri Nartham Srinivas Ramananda Prabhu Trai Ki Jai, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Raghunath, Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Braja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai, Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund Ki Jai, Shri Mona Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai, Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya Ki Jai, Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Today is the day that Srila Prabhupada entered. Did he arrive in Boston today? I think it was. He arrived in Boston today in 1965, this day. So Srila Prabhupada's arrival in the West and completely purifying the world. Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Shinitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Om Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavashacha Krishna Bhakti Padadevi Sattvatai Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat Pranams. Oh, and Manjari is saying, whoops, wrong one. 8 forms? Yeah, what is this? Oh God, I have such a bad memory. Who was it that divided into 8 forms? Is it living into some rishi? Oh God, I can't remember. But no, there are stories where different rishis and stuff, they expand themselves into multiple forms to do various things. So yeah, it is possible. Not just, but the Supreme Lord can expand into unlimited forms, whereas jivas can only. Although actually, I have questions about this because, yeah, I'm curious. I have questions about this because the Lord expands into unlimited forms, and also he's performing pastimes in many different universes at the same time, and so are his associates, and those associates are jivas. Okay, yeah, I have a question here. That's I'll have to. If anybody knows the answer, let me know. Otherwise, I will. Yeah. All right. Dandavat pranams, everybody. See you all tomorrow. I'm going to be doing a kirtan class with Manjari Didi, my cousin. We'll be doing that today at 4:30 p.m. India time. But it's a Chinese class, so I say like a couple sentences and then you have to wait for it to translate it in Chinese. So yeah, if you're feeling patient. I don't know what I'm going to speak about today, but maybe since today is the day that Srila Prabhupada arrived in the West, I should speak about that. All right. Haribol. Dandavat pranams.